The insult to injury here is that same drug that the FDA held up 2 years ago is now a potential treatment for COVID-related pneumonia. And it would have already been accessible to people who are sick and dying right now if the FDA had not, with its ridiculous red tape, try to force this company to do dog testing that wasn't necessary and wasn't going to get this drug to people faster.
Joining me now is Justin Goodman. He is the vice president of the watchdog group called the White Coat Waste Project. Justin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie.
And for those of you watching, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the Daily Caller. Now, Justin, I'll let you explain what the White Coat Waste Project mission is, but in a nutshell, from just reading a little bit about your group, your organization is trying to stop drug companies from doing cruel tests on dogs and puppies. And I didn't realize that this was still happening in the US.
You're absolutely right. A lot of people think that cosmetics companies, for example, are the biggest offender when it comes to animal testing. But in reality, the United States government is public enemy number one when it comes to animal testing around the world, whether it's funding $20 billion a year with our tax dollars to pay for animal tests, or in the case like we're talking about with the FDA, forcing companies against their will to perform expensive, slow, and unnecessary dog testing, which is, hampering cures for diseases like COVID, killing a lot of dogs and costing companies tens of millions of dollars. That's being wasted on that unnecessarily.
Why dogs? And also if you could describe some of the tests that they're running.
So it's actually really, really sick when you think about it. On the government's website, it says that they prefer using beagles, first of all, because they're small and docile, so they're very easy to cage and abuse. That's the reason they pick beagles. And these regulations that are forcing companies to test on dogs now date back to the 1930s. And obviously, biomedical research has advanced leaps and bounds since then. And we know now the FDA admits that 9 out of 10 drugs that pass these dog tests and other animal tests fail in humans because the experiments don't work. They don't predict what happens in people when you torture a dog. And some of the experiments that the FDA is forcing companies to do includes buying or commissioning tests on 4-month-old puppies, and then for up to a year at a time, either forcing them to breathe or swallow experimental drugs to the point where a lot of them die. Some of them get very sick, and at the end, whether they survive or not, they're killed and dissected.
Well, and you're saying that these tests are pretty much useless because humans are so different than dogs.
That's absolutely right. And institutional inertia at the FDA, bureaucracy and red tape, is the only thing that's keeping this disgusting practice going. The pharmaceutical industry has recently dramatically increased R&D, but also decreased animal testing. They're developing new technologies that are more efficient, more effective, are going to get cures to us quicker. The problem is that FDA is putting up roadblocks. They're not letting these new technologies be used. And the result is that drugs that are safe and effective in people are not making it to market. A lot of animals are dying, and companies are wasting billions of dollars on tests that are unnecessary.
What's the FDA's excuse for this? Like, who at the FDA supports this? I'm just thinking of all the dog lovers and animal lovers in America. And aside from that, the fact that, you're telling me these numbers, that the tests really don't translate to anything.
That's right. And listen, you're not alone. We just did some polling. 2/3 of Americans, Republicans, Democrats, across the board, want the FDA to eliminate this mandate because it's unscientific, it's unproductive, and it's hurting people and animals. The people at the FDA who are requiring this are just, relics. They've been looking at this type of data for a long time. They're used to it. And just because of institutional inertia, because this is the way they've always done things, this is the only reason they're continuing to. And not only are they forcing companies to do this, when companies are coming to them and saying, we don't want to test on dogs, we have another technology, it's actually going to give us better data that will tell us what happens in people, not puppies, the FDA is telling them, too bad, do the dog testing or don't get your drug approved.
So what companies are being forced to use dogs, or if you could name some of the companies that have been pushing back against this?
Yeah, so the poster child for this problem is really a company called Vanda Pharmaceuticals that's based here in Washington, D.C. And a couple of years ago, they had a drug that they had already tested extensively in animals, including dogs in some trials, and humans, because well, the animal test because the FDA required it, and humans because that's obviously the right thing to do. They already had this drug in late stage human trials. It was already safe and effective. The data looked good. The FDA halted the trial. They literally stopped sick people from taking a drug and said to Vanda, if you don't do a 9-month study in dogs, you're gonna have to poison puppies, spend $750,000. If you don't do this study, we're not letting you continue your human trials, even though the human trials were already successful and there was a ton of data showing that the drug was safe. That was 2 years ago, and the drug never made it to market. They were at a standstill. The insult to injury here is that same drug that the FDA held up 2 years ago is now a potential treatment for COVID-related pneumonia. And it would have already been accessible to people who are sick and dying right now if the FDA had not, with its ridiculous red tape, try to force this company to do dog testing that wasn't necessary and wasn't going to get this drug to people faster.
Where do lawmakers stand on this? I mean, part of your effort is to get the attention of lawmakers. Do you have any lawmakers who are supporting your group's effort?
Absolutely. And again, like I said, this is something that has broad bipartisan support, both on the street and in Congress. And right now we're working with people like Congressman Matt Gaetz from Florida, who's been an outstanding champion on cutting government-funded and government-mandated animal testing. He's leading this charge with us. Congressman Brendan Boyle from Pennsylvania has been an outstanding leader on this. It's really a great issue that brings people together, and we've been able to get so much done at the FDA in the last few years. A couple years ago, we exposed that the FDA was addicting monkeys to nicotine. They had spent $5.5 million taxpayer dollars to addict monkeys to nicotine. This is in the 2010s this was happening. We got that stopped with help from Congress. Last year, we got the FDA to enact a policy allowing animals to be retired, dogs and other animals to be retired from their labs after experiments are completed. So we've made a lot of progress at the FDA already in recent years. And the FDA in other areas have been forward-looking. So for things like food ingredients or veterinary drugs, they have been looking for ways to replace dog testing with alternatives. The problem is when it comes to dog testing, they have not turned a critical eye, and that's where the biggest problem is. That's where the most dogs are being killed in the worst ways, and it's completely unnecessary. It's costing these companies a lot of money. Vanda Pharmaceuticals, when they picked that fight with the FDA over the dog testing and drew a line in the sand, their stock tanked 20% the next day. Tens of millions of dollars of stock value wiped out just because shareholders were afraid that the drug might not get approved because of this dog testing impasse. That's completely unacceptable. The dog testing is not necessary, and companies want to do better, and the FDA isn't letting them.
Well, Justin, thank you for your insight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Stephanie.